Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Last one's arriving, sitting down. Everybody close by the door, just in case you want to escape. That's what people usually do. They sit at the door so they can run away, sneaking away. That's very nice. But happy to see you here. We had a lovely evening last night, organized by FIDI UK. Nick, many thanks for orchestrating that. Well done. For some, it was a bit later, I suppose, and that's why we have a bit less people than we would have expected, because many were interested in this session. Usually when you talk about these kind of sensitive subjects, having to deal with customers, with RMCs, and you go to the bar the night before, there's plenty of questions, criticism, fighting spirit, and then the session starts and it's very quiet usually. All of a sudden, there's not too much to ask any longer. By the way, that's why we have a very competent panel here to talk about this. Between giants and clients. Movers, people don't always know that, but movers are a big supply chain, but full of relatively small companies. If you read the EY financial assessment report of last year, you will see that movers on average, worldwide, FIDI movers, have a turnover, have a net revenue of about 5 million euro. That compares not with what some of their customers represent, whether they're corporate customers, whether they're RMCs, or whether they're other movers, big move managers, comparing to those smaller moves. So it's a bit difficult sometimes. And on top of that, without having those giants above them, and then a huge supply chain below them, with shipping lines who are not really approachable to negotiate rates, etc., that's another force there. And in between are the movers and the DSPs, and they try to manage all that somehow, to make sure that they can merge that somehow. But at the same time, they get huge requirements from government, from the customers as well, on compliance, and have to battle that one as well. And then in the end, after you've done everything, you've done all the compliance check boxes, answered every RFP question, what counts? The rates count in the end. I often wonder, do they ever read the responses that we sent out? But it's the rates that count in the end. And this is where the battle always starts. And luckily we have a panel to talk about this. I'm going to ask them to quickly introduce themselves, starting with you, Nikki.
Hi, I'm Nikki French. Grace in Australia. I'm the Director of Moving Services, responsible for all household goods moving for the Grace Removals business. I'm more than 30 years in the industry, about 20 of which was in the UK, and the last 12 years in Australia.
Thank you. Samuel?
Morning, everyone. Samuel Mergui. I'm the new CEO of Santa Fe Relocation, based in UK. I've been in the Mobilitas group for the last 20 years, so I've got 20 years of experience in the industry, even if I'm the new kid on the block, I like to say today. But I've been in the shadow for the last 20 years.
Very well. Thank you. Annika?
Welcome to the sun.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Annika Ropi. I'm from Alpha Mobility. We work in Scandinavia, in 4 countries. I'm based in Stockholm, by the way. I am also a new kid on the block. I've been in the industry for 3 years, having spent a lot of years, though, in telecoms and technology mostly. So I also have some experience from industries where technology might have changed the dynamics in the business. So I'm very honored in this complex question that you're asking, Jesse.
Thank you. Derek?
Yeah, Derek Young. I'm with Paramount Transportation Systems. I stopped counting after 20 years, so 20 plus years in the industry. I did have the opportunity to manage smaller offices or a country manager for less than 5 million for about 15 years. And then was fortunate to join an RMC for 10 years, and now I'm back in the moving. It's been about 2 years now. So.
Very well. Thank you very much. I think the competence is there, and hopefully there will be some lovely answers. And again, if there's any questions from the audience, let us know. There will be a Q&A at the end. If it's really pressing and you can't hold yourself, feel free to jump up and attack the podium at any given time. Just watch out for red and yellow cards, just because. Nick, I want to start with you. Referring back to what I just said, how much are movers, considering their relatively small size, a match for those giant RMCs, or small ones as well, but or big corporate customers?
I think if you're looking at just the price, then that's a really tough gig to match those large corporate RMCs. I think sometimes we lose sight of the fact that this is a very personal business. And the relocatee at the end of it is entrusting us with their life. And they want to work with somebody that they can build a personal relationship with. And I think that the mover has the ability to step into that gap and be that trusted person that they can form a relationship with, that has local knowledge, has flexibility to work with that individual to get them the outcomes that they need.
How easy is it when you are faced with procurement, talking about personal relationship with the customers? How much are they impressed by it, perhaps, Annika?
But I think it's, we just actually had that, funny that you ask it. We had a RFP and RFQ quite recently where the whole procurement was geared towards, like, it was, we were moving something, an object. And we had to sort of rewrite our whole response and talk about the fact that we're actually moving a family. We are not, unfortunately, people do not live in warehouses like any other goods. So we were really taking a very personal touch when we described to the customer and to procurement that imagine that we're actually going into the family's home and we are dealing with their personal belongings. It's not just any table, it is my table. And I think that actually hit a note on them to also, to your point, I think, it is a very stressful situation to move. And one of the things that struck me when I came to this business, it is an intimate thing we're doing. It's not handling any kind of goods. It's an intimate process where the mover is actually the one carrying the boxes, packing the stuff, integrating or communicating. And I think that communication is key. If I would sort of answer your first question, I think one of the key values is the communication. And are we as an industry, do we value that? Or do we think that is only something we do?
I'll jump in and say that I think what you're saying is pointing out that we need to train and teach these corporates what it's about. But I don't think a procurement manager, even our HR counterparts, they worry about the personal side because they have to deal with the aftermath if something goes wrong. But during the RFP process in the procurement, they do not consider that because in their eyes, it's commoditized already. They just expect you can do your job and that you can handle the family well. So I think our job comes down to explaining, why there's uncertainty in our model, and that's why, the pricing has to make sure we have flexibility to deal with uncertainty so that we can make sure there's the right outcome at the end. I think this whole discussion on price being the last word comes down to, the consultative sales process with your client explaining so that you can show the value.
Yeah.
So are we bad at sales? Is that what you're trying to tell traditionally?
Yeah, I think we are, to be honest. I don't think we're very good, and we're getting better. And there's companies out there that are more successful, obviously have better approach and better sales. But because you started off talking about the smaller companies, and of course, this is maybe what helps them the most is, they need to have that sales acumen as well if they want to, participate. Otherwise, it'll just be an OADA.
Yeah. Is procurement impressed with the personal approach, you think, Samuel?
I think you need to explain them and teach them how to read our business solution, our business proposal. The best advocate, and I saw it a lot of time during all the RFP, is you talk with the procurement, but you have the mobility team. The mobility team is usually on our side. They understand what we do. As Nikki said, we work with them for many, many years. The procurement has a different agenda. But if you understand that and you put the ego aside, you just try to walk through this process with the procurement, understand this agenda, but respect your value as well at one stage. You will explain what you do, you empower the business solution, you will show as well what kind of other services that you can bring around the table. So you show them that you're more than just a tender, it's a global relationship. And I think all at the panel we have been working with corporate clients for more than 20 years. So there is a room always to improve and to grow. But they play a game. For me, it's just a game. and everyone plays partition. So you need to stick to what you think,
So we're missing certain. Sorry, go ahead. Yes, Annika, go ahead.
No, I was just going to slightly disagree with you, actually.
Okay.
Because I think that
I like that, by the way, when there's disagreement.
Yeah, he told us to disagree, so I'm trying to find something to disagree on. So, no. But I think that if you are the company that is actually negotiating with the customer and selling to the customer, whether you're an RMC or you're small on your own market, I think our industry needs to learn that there's a big responsibility in that sales process, because it's in that sales process that we can lift the value of our business. And it is the HR, this is my disagreement on procurement, because I think it is the HR or whoever is sort of ordering the services that are giving an order to procurement to actually do the procurement. And then they will procure at a low cost whatever was ordered. So I think it is extremely important for us to be bold, and it lies a big responsibility, I think, on the RMCs, if that's the case, to actually, or whoever, even Alpha, we are doing a lot of direct business in our region. It lies a big responsibility on us to actually be able to lift the value of whatever we're doing, and I think that's the personal touch. So I would like to sort of, yes, please.
I'm not disagreeing, because I think you're agreeing with my disagreement. But what I'd add to that is, when we're talking about this, we have to educate the client. The part that's missing is what you brought in is we're actually servicing the HR.
Exactly.
Right? And so often the best pathway and always the best pathway to procurement is giving the HR people the tools that they can go to procurement and show them, because they're the ones passionate and don't want, and procurement has a responsibility to help HR, not us.
Absolutely.
So yeah, in that sales process, it's giving the tools to the HR so they can go and then convince procurement.
Derek, you mentioned that we don't have enough sales training, and I get that, and probably that's true, I think, and we've seen that from our experiences as well, also in our academy. Isn't part of the sales training that you learn on how procurement really works? And actually we should include in sales training a chapter on how does procurement work, because that's an underestimated element in there, I think.
A lot,
no?
yeah, a lot. Our sales team go to the market with how to sell our product, how to upsell, how to present the business and the business solution. Usually during the tenders, they don't know how to handle the procurement and the different questions and how to understand, to read the matrix. So this is an essential part of the training. We need to, let's say, help our sales team to be able to get ready during the different tender, to be able to discuss equal to equal with the procurement team.
Because in the end, the HR mobility team is the internal customer of procurement. So you need to make sure that you service both somehow, that you are keeping balance there, that you know who the key persons are everywhere. Just for information, I've once done a procurement training, pure procurement training, not sales training, but pure procurement, and I did that together with our sales team 15 years ago, 12 years ago. It was an eye-opener for me, because I underestimated procurement. I thought they were, those people buying pencils, very boring usually, and not very smart in what they were doing. These are very smart people, they know exactly what they're doing. The tactics are just second to none. And I was blown away by how good they do this. Have you come across that as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest feedbacks that you get from procurement, if you go and read articles about procurement and the way that they work, is that people do not read and answer the question properly. And so actually you don't give the information that the procurement is looking for. So, to come back to what Annika and Derek are saying, what you've got to do is you've got to give them what they want and give them what we want. It's like, that they're looking for a particular angle, and you need to provide that just to tick the boxes to stay in the exercise, and then you need to give them more, and you need to educate them on what was it that they missed in the process that you actually think is really important to get them the right outcomes in this exercise.
Yeah. But how fair is 24 pages of RFP to respond to for a company with 2 million revenue, 3 million revenue? Is that feasible?
It is hard. It is super hard. And it's a lot of work as well.
Yeah, but I would add that, you know, if you're a smaller company, you got to choose your battles. Maybe that's not your market segment. There's a lot of smaller companies and ones that are not as onerous to find out, you know, in your market that you can try to get business from. And so, you know, if you're not the right size company to answer that RFP, maybe you're not the right size to service the business. My whole point is you got to look at what your market is and then choose the ones where you can be the most successful in and not waste time on these.
I would also say that, you know, you tend to find, well, we certainly have found in our market space that, you know, the HR teams, the procurement process, going to a tender exercise is like the last thing that any of them want, because it's a huge amount of work for them too. And so sitting waiting for RFPs to come out so that you can go through that process, we're just kind of feeding that model. You need to go upstream and you need to build those relationships and cut that off at the pass so that they don't want to go out and do a full-blown RFP. And you've already given them, you know, 2/3 of that information before they even get there, and then they can consider alternatives. In the vast majority of the corporate space, they don't want to go to RFP. It's too much work for them too.
Samuel, are movers and DSPs perhaps too much focused on top-line revenue instead of bottom line? This is a popular thing we hear from time to time.
Yeah, mainly they looking at the. Yeah, I agree with. I certainly agree with that statement. They are quite focused on the top line, where we should look at the profitability of the operation and on the global relationship.
So what's lacking then? And we're talking about tools that were missing. Sales was one of them. Lack of knowledge on procurement.
You need to bring some technology. You need to increase also your supply chain, bringing more people around the table. When we talk about maybe small or medium size of company, I bet to differ here. Maybe it's not the sweet spot, but maybe they can find partner under different associations so we can bid all together to be stronger together, and to be able to lift some leverage to increase the profitability over there.
I also with a purpose, because if you look at the recent demise of a smaller RMC, I believe, and we don't have to name them, but they went bankrupt just a couple of months ago. And if you look at the debts they left behind, I was, you know, flabbergasted by that. I thought those are serious debts that are left behind somehow. How can this happen? Is it because of the pressure of the large, for them, a large RMC putting pressure on them to just accept the business? Top-line revenue counts, Derek?
You know, I don't know the details of their demise, but, you know, I mean, to me, that obviously shows of a mismanagement of how they're approaching their clients and how they manage their business. It's as simple as that. Because I think any business model in the RMC is viable, but you have to stick with what you can do and say no sometimes. So maybe they're saying yes to too many. But it's a good point, that I'm just adding on to that, is that, you know, the RMCs are only responding to what the corporate clients are asking. So they're not making all this stuff up to make our lives difficult, and they don't want to have to. Every box they're asking us to tick, they had to tick already. And the RMC just has so many clients, they've had to tick all the boxes. And so if you want to do all their business and be on their discretionary board, then you have to tick all the boxes, because that's their lead, you know, those are contractual requirements with their clients. So.
But, and I'm asking for all of you, sorry, Annika, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say that on the profitability side, I think there's only two ways to get profitability. Either you go with your sales or you cut your cost. And you need, I think we need to maybe share better. How do we do that? So we talked about sales earlier, and we can talk about diversification, which I think is important for us, especially if you're a small company. But also, how do you look at your cost? And how do you work with your cost? And I would really encourage many of us to sort of cooperate a little bit more on that. And Alpha has reached out to one or two of you here to sort of start working between CFO to CFO in order to, it sounds easy to manage margins in a move project, but is it really? Because every 10, whatever currency you're using is actually important, because the margin in money is so small. So every little detail. So how do we do that? We could help each other there. That's not the competition. So I think to work with efficiency, how do you measure efficiency within your company? How do we work with that? Because that's also super important.
Every time, I appreciate that, but every time movers cut their costs, where is the profit of that cost going to, the benefit of that cost cutting going to? Where is that going to? Is it going to the company or is it going to the customer?
And it should stay in the company, because
I know,
otherwise
what
you
happens
give
in
away the
reality?
price.
What happens in reality?
Yeah.
It's given to the customer, correct?
Correct.
Nikki?
Correct.
So what do you do
Partly,
about
I
that?
hope.
How can you ensure that whatever cost cutting you do, it goes back into the company? Because that's vital for the survival of the company, right?
But then that comes to the top line, I think. That comes to the sales. That comes to creating the value, to be tough. And when it comes to the RFP, answering the RFP, I think it's also like another language to learn. Even though you're a small company, you will soon see the pattern in any of the RFPs and sort of find your way of answering and up it. So, but any other question on?
And not answer all the RFPs. You know, in my previous life as RMC, they would turn down over 50% of the RFPs that they got invited to. Because
of complex situations, or
it's just not their target market, or you know, not enough volume, or whatever reason it is. You don't have to answer everything. You got to choose your battles.
Exactly.
so are RMCs then too powerful? An RMC is, after all, a middleman economy, right? In between the corporate customers and the supply chain. And that's good. It's good to have a middleman economy because it offers certain facilities to work within that vertical. But maybe they've become too powerful with a huge supply chain. Not just movers, DSPs, visa migration, you name it, corporate housing. And they have their own supply chains as well, obviously. And then those big corporate customers above. Are they not too powerful and therefore really not bypassing the whole purpose of having a middleman economy?
Well, I'm not sure. I'm not entirely sure that when you use the word powerful, that's really right. I mean, if I was sitting in their shoes and I've got movers knocking on their door every day saying, "Hey, I'll do this for 15% less than they'll do it for, and I'll give you X, Y, and Z free thrown in for the deal as well." Why wouldn't you say yes? I mean, I'm just putting myself in their shoes, because I'm telling you, that's what's happened in the moving industry over the last 30 years. It wasn't that the RMCs kind of, were this powerful entity. We all went there and knocked on their door and said, "Hey, I'd like your business and I'll do it for no margin."
But that's not sustainable in the end.
No,
right?
of course it's not sustainable, no. But that, if I look at what's happened in our industry over the last 30 years, that is what we've done. I feel strongly we've done it to ourselves. And, the tide is turning. I think that the globalisation model is potentially coming to an end. Certainly, there will still be the RMCs and there'll still be a space in the market for them. There is a space for us in that market too. And if we take the opportunity to understand what the value is in our business and to sell that value, we actually have an opportunity to exit out of constantly going to the bottom of the price ladder. But you have to understand where the value is in your business, what you want to get out of it, and sell to your strengths, and then you will retain margin.
You second that, Samuel?
Yeah, I second that, because you need to, it's always back to educated the business as well with our value proposition. So there will be, I think on my side, I saw a quick change with no matter what, globalization and global accounts, but they want a local answer with a local services, with a local provider. No matter what the size of the company you are, you need to, as I always say to my team, stay humble, be local, answer global, but be local, because they need that contact. They lose that contact for the last maybe 7-6 years because it was massive RFP, massive contract, and different country, but procurement and even the mobility team need to be, it's a service business, so you need to be a tailor-made services for them.
To what Nikki said, the former CEO of Santa Fe said recently that I don't think that the industry has fully grasped that globalization as we know it has come to an end or to a halt. We are moving back to regionalization, reorganization of supply chains, and potential impacts on the benefits that companies can offer to their companies. Is that correct? Derek?
Well,
Is this the end of the globalization?
I don't think so, because it may be that there's a certain tier of corporate clients that will go backwards. I don't know, but I think a lot of the large ones, you know, they have a lot of services that flow through HR, and HR, they have outsourced those. And the RMCs
So you can't get them back, you mean?
they don't want them back. I don't think they want them back. They're reaping a benefit from having outsourced them. I don't think that's been a failure, so why would they bring it back? But there's maybe the smaller corporations and mid-sized corporations that are out there that maybe they've tried the RMC model and it doesn't fit for them, and so those might go back. But I don't see the larger clients now with, you know, breaking apart their model and start wanting to manage more suppliers.
Is it a purpose for a move? Sorry, Annika, you wanted to?
Yeah, I just wanted to add on, the keynote speaker yesterday, I thought he was really fascinating. I liked what he said. So on that, the problem is seldomly the problem. So if we take another perspective and look at this, why are we even in this business? Well, we're in the business because there's a shortage of, I guess, two reasons. There's a shortage of skilled, if I talk about then workforce migration as part of our business. So workforce migration means that any corporate client is fighting a big battle for talents right now. Correct. And that battle is on a global basis. If I take the Scandinavian countries as an example, we need to import engineers because we can simply not have it. We don't have enough engineers. So I'm thinking, I'm not sure that maybe globalization as we know it is coming to an end, but I do think workforce migration and sort of the ability to attract talent, we are actually part of that attraction package. I don't know if you guys are fully aware, but I was sort of blown away when I'm talking to some of our really large clients, and I realized how important it is for the young engineers or the C-level person moving somewhere. What's in the relocation package for me and my family? Mm-hmm. And I think that's sort of the value. And if we as small movers or big movers can help the RMCs who actually managed, and I think this is a kudos to the RMCs or anybody who is selling, for some reason they became the speaking partner on these things. And how do you become the speaking partner on this level? Well, then you need to talk about the values that we're actually providing. So I would slightly disagree. I think maybe globalization, maybe Sweden is not going to import all our onions from Australia, sorry guys, but maybe we take them from somewhere closer, Spain. But I do think that workforce migration generally, no, I don't. I think we have only seen the start.
Okay, very good. We do see, if we look at the EY financial assessment report that we publish every year, that there remains a vulnerability, particularly with the movers and at DSPs as well, on the bottom line, the profitability. Now, we've tried many times to turn that ship, no doubt. We've talked about it in many conferences, not talking about pricing because we're not allowed, but to drive that knowledge in movers and DSPs' head that we are important, like you said. How can that translate into better margins somehow? Talking about costing, we talked about already, but how can we translate that into better margins? What can they do to withstand that pressure on them, that constant pressure on them? As an entrepreneur, I mean.
I have an idea.
Yes, you can.
As a newcomer, and this might be super crazy,
but that's why I'm looking at you as well.
But I'm thinking, are we really differentiating in the services that we deliver? I can tell you Alpha is not doing that. So we are delivering the same great service, whether they are paying this or that for whatever tonnage. So how could we together, and I was thinking again, reference back to the guy yesterday, if we together, a few of us together, could start to work on a price model with the RMCs, because this is an ecosystem. It's not good to sort of fight each other. But could we find some kind of service level model? Okay, and back to sales again. If you want to buy this for cheap price, this is what you get. If you want to pay this, you will get sustainability, you will get social sustainability. I think that's something maybe we can talk more about in our industry. How do we guarantee salaries, social working environment, etc.? Can we be bold at the sales time and talk about, and actually do not deliver the same kind of service? That is sort of irritates me when I look at how we do it, because we over-deliver compared to the price. How to do that? I think it's very difficult to do it alone. I think we need to sort of help each other then.
So you're actually saying that we should partner with the RMCs?
Not necessarily. Yes, in having a dialogue with the customer, absolutely.
So are RMCs, on whose side are on? Whose side are RMCs on? Is it the customer side or is it the supply chain side? Or is there no choice? Derek, you've worked for an RMC.
They just want to make their corporate client happy, and they do have models where they offer different levels of moving. But what you're saying is having it be more of their sales to corporate, saying you should choose us as an RMC because we have this variable model. I think RMCs mainly have been listening to the clients, and if the clients want that model, then they're putting it in place, and they have a preferred network, and they have a VIP programs, and they have other stuff that we've all are familiar with because we've been brought in. So they're just responding to the client demand.
So what's the answer for the mover supply chain, where we've got small companies, we've got big companies? Is it better to have a small company with low overhead, or should we scale up and do some consolidations, perhaps? I mean, Samuel, your company was reaching purpose by Mobilitas, so it's becoming a much larger organization. Are you then better armed against this? Or just not?
But at the same time, I would drive Santa Fe completely independently. So there is, if you want, a consolidation on the supply chain, but the strategy of all companies inside the group are completely independent. Having said that, you need to work with everyone, and you need to onboard as well local partner to share a bit the piece of the cake, I would say. I'm not sure that RMC are against us. We just need to work with them, educate as well them to understand our business proposition sometime. And I'm confident on the fact that we'll not risk the fact to disappoint their clients. They want to serve their client, as you said, so they know at one stage that they need to choose a reliable partner as well. So if you put in front of you the value proposition, you know how to explain your services, adding services, and of course you do a mix, you work on your supply chain with a different company. It's not because you're part of the same group, you can work with a partner. As she said, we can work together, we can communicate, work together to ease the supply chain and to be more competitive and profitable.
Nikki, smaller businesses with low overhead or large consolidated business?
I still think there is room for both, but I also think that the smaller businesses will need to diversify their product offering, even if that's just into the DSP space. I think that we will see a lot of DSP providers. They are kind of ma and pa shops, they're probably reaching retirement. There's no massive value to the business, typically they don't have signed contracts that, give you an asset value, and there are no assets to a DSP. So I think that we will see a lot of those disappearing from the market because there's no business to sell when they want to retire. And I think that's an opportunity for movers to move into that space. And the broader business space that you have, the more product stream you've got to afford to do things like the compliance and, like ISO certification and things like that. They're expensive to do, but if you've got a broader product base and you're spreading the cost of that across a broader product base, then you're going to get a better return for your money. And I think even the smallest movers in our market need to look at diversifying their product range, and doing other things, whether that's, records management, whether that's, a transport business, whether that's DSP. But I think that you have to think about that.
Okay, we'll have a first question already. That's always Max, by the way. We can count on Max to ask a question. Sorry.
So, I just play my presidential card for 2 seconds. I don't play it often, but I'd like to play it if you don't mind if I run it.
Yeah.
There was some conversation earlier this week around RMCs, and I think, Annika, a very, very interesting point around the partnering in the ecosystem of the client, the RMC, the mover, and I love that. I can just see that conversation happening. It was said in a meeting earlier this week, Jesse, you were there, that the RMCs spend more time negotiating their fees with their clients than they do anything about moving. Like, to your point, we are not here they're not out here to make it punitive for us to operate within this ecosystem. They really are battling uphill for every dollar, euro that they're trying to make, and that fee structure has become so important all of a sudden for the RMC. A little bit of color around that other side where we see that negotiation between the RMC and the client, because I think we're a bit maybe immune to that. We don't really see that side.
Exactly.
So some color around the pressure on the RMC just to get their fees right, never mind the cost of what a long carry is, or what a shuttle cost is, or what the cost plus will be on a freight that's overpriced in the market. A little bit of color on that might be interesting for the audience to hear around the negotiations between the RMC and their client on that cost base, the contracts, the RFPs. What are you focusing on there?
Has that changed, you think, by the way, in the past year, that the pressure on their own fees is getting harder? No?
It's been ongoing for a long time. It keeps getting more and more. So I think if all of us could look at the profitability of the RMCs, we'd be quite shocked. I think there's the larger movers in our group make more money than them, right? It's not an easy model because they have a lot of high overhead costs with some of their service lines.
Yeah, we heard some bad stories about RMCs in financial trouble. That's true.
Yeah.
Sorry, I want to go back to Max.
Yeah, thank you for hiding me as a first questioner all the time. Thanks.
Too late now, it's Derek now.
Yeah. So, was that already discussed between you? So I want to come back to Annika's point. You said in your country, in the Nordic countries, you have a huge lack of engineers. I wrote in some handouts in the business, in the moving industry, there's a huge lack of truck drivers in the United States, in Canada. I do not know how it is in Australia, but I can tell you in Europe, it is incredible.
Incredible.
Now, I have a question. It is not only on high level. Now it is on middle level.
Absolutely.
And it starts on low level. Well, if you have headhunters asking drivers in front of your home whether they want to change to another company, then you know where we are. It is just a remark. And I want to ask, Derek, being in these RMCs, do you see, at an RMC point of view, the risk that in 5 years' time, half of the moving companies are gone because they don't have any people anymore carrying furniture, driving a truck, being able to do something? Have you that in mind?
That's a good question, and unfortunately, I would say for the perspective of most RMCs, those concerns are not anything they're thinking about.
Yeah.
They expect us to manage our business model. And, in some RMCs, moving is the bastard son that they have to deal with, or whatever you want to put it. It's the service they manage that has the most noise, and they hate noise because their customers too. So yeah, I don't think that they're worried about. They expect us to figure that out.
And can I just sort of add to that? I think that it's within, and you know this, Max, already, but within all of the moving companies, that's a big question. How do we attract people to our business? And I think I read it somewhere in some of the pre-read. How do we actually do that? And how can we make a person really like being a truck driver in Europe? Or do we need to change model? And I won't mention trains because then Andrew will kill me. But so I think, how do we actually deal with this? Because it's a real problem, and it might become that we cannot actually supply. And one thing that amazes me, sorry for taking a loop on this, but how come that we are fighting on price on truck drivers in Europe when there's a shortage? The market model, what happened to the market model on price? I don't know what happened.
Yeah.
Why are we fighting each
Question demand usually works in a different way.
It usually works, there's this extreme shortage, and still we're fighting on price.
So maybe before
sorry.
going to a question there, I'll pick on that one. Our industry, we don't recognize ourselves as valuable, apparently, right? We
I
see
think
ourselves
so.
as down at the bottom
think
end of the
so.
food chain,
Yeah,
whilst we shouldn't be there.
no.
Very often it was said that we're not a sexy industry, but we actually are. If I ask young people, we are a very sexy industry when they are
Absolutely.
working in our business.
Absolutely.
So how do we convince them? We have to convince ourselves sometimes, no? in the first place.
Yeah, and that comes back to what we said right at the start of this session. I think you have to understand what are the valuable things that about your service that you are selling, and I think a lot of people can't articulate that. We have developed some products in our business that are really unique around the housing space, and we're super excited about them, and we can't wait to tell everybody this is in terms of our corporate clients, and I think that everybody has to have some things in your business that you're super excited and super proud about, and then you will start to grow a message. But I think a lot of people just don't recognize the value of the service that they sell, and so then they don't get passionate enough about it, and then it just becomes about the price again.
And, go ahead.
Sorry. Mark.
Good morning, everyone. This is Mario with White & Company. Having spent 25 years in the industry times 2. This is my milestone this year. I can offer some perspective, but also have a question that needs to be thrown to the panel for discussion. We are in the supply chain, and yes, the RMCs, the big ones, are controlling the tonnage when it comes to us, and they're dealing with very difficult customers and very difficult pricing models that they have to adhere to. What I've heard from the panel is the collaboration and the partnership with the RMCs. What I'm also seeing is the elephant in the room that we're not talking about yet, which is the auditors that are playing a role in this relationship. What we're also should be talking about is the model of communication between the RMC, the mover, and the client. In the last few years, I've learned the Spock, what is Spock, and I realized that it's not the one from Star Trek. Very quickly, I realized that all of a sudden we're not allowed to talk to the transferee because somebody came up with a brilliant idea that the only person that should be talking to the transferee is the RMC. And yet, we're the ones who are delivering the service on a local level. So, Samuel, that's a big challenge when you're trying to say, let's work together in a local environment to where, as in partnership, dealing with the customers. Now, I don't have answers or solutions to any of the above, but it's been an evolution. The last 25 years of my 50 years in the industry, it's been an evolution. And I don't see it getting better, because the more distance you put between the RMC, the supplier, and back to, Jesse, your comment about we, the mover, we're in the bottom of the chain, but some of these RMCs are treating us like we're at the bottom of the chain. When they're detaching us from communicating with the transferee and they're treating it like, let me put it this way, a plumber will be getting more respect because you know that the plumber, you're worried about him showing up. We show up every single day. And by the way, for those who don't know me, I work for a moving company. We don't do DSP, we don't do anything else. We employ close to 600 people. We make our living from moving. And I'm very proud after 50 years having represented the industry, but I'm also disillusioned to some of the things that we're accepting because we are letting ourselves driven down to fumes when it comes to profitability, which has put a lot of moving companies in the cemetery. We've seen it across in the United States, we've seen it in Europe and so on. Now, we keep using the word partnership. It's a two-way street.
Yes.
Okay? But it isn't often. It's a what I expect out of you and not what I'm willing to give back. The only way we're going to get out of this hole is a true conversation with the people and then re-engineer the processes that we have in place, communication being one of them. I always approach my clients with the perspective of, I put everything on the table, you put everything on the table, and we see whether we can have a common ground. My concern is as the evolution of all the corporate accounts going more and more to the RMCs and hearing from all of you that we need to work closer to the RMCs, then allow us to get closer, and I'm addressing that to the RMCs. Don't keep us at arm's length and tell us you can't do this and that. And finally is the auditor. Where does the auditor fit into all this? Which again, it's about a 30-year, and you know, Nikki, you've been, what, 30 years in the business? I don't remember 40 years ago that we were talking about auditors, okay? And we know how they make their living. It's a tough case. I respect what they're doing, but they need to also respect us.
But do you have a question? Because you said I'm going to have a question.
Yes, the question is,
Good.
where do you see the auditors fit into this whole conversation between giants and clients? Is it giants, auditors, and clients, or I just really ask you your perspective on the auditor role?
I feel a lot of anger as well.
No,
and
frustration.
passion. No, passion
No,
and
no.
anger, and that's good.
Passion, yes.
Yeah.
I'm Italian by birth, so I'm Sicilian, even worse. From
Okay,
New York.
Who wants to tackle that one and take the microphone away from him before he goes on forever?
Good question. Can I start?
Yes, Annika, please.
Sorry, can I just ask a question back? Do you feel the same from all RMCs? That they communicate exactly. Thank you. So if I can address that, not avoiding your question, somebody else can answer that one. But I think it's so important because to me that's a sign of fear.
Yeah.
That's the first sign of losing control over the customer. And I think in that we could sort of fuel ourselves to work. And when I say work together, if we have an RMC that is not working together with us, I would really look at, and I'm talking in, how do you say, present sense, look at how I can replace them. Mm-hmm. Because it is a control that is not a partnership. And if you want somebody, and maybe you don't have the opportunity right now, so I think for us to look at what are then the opportunities. If this has become 80% of my revenue stream and my partner is treating me like this, I think I'm going for a divorce. Maybe I would sort of sort my alternatives and look for new lovers, but then I'll at least start to do that and do diversification. I would do.
Yeah.
Yeah, but really, I'm on.
Divorce is very expensive.
Me too. I know that. Sorry. Let's go.
No, but
Samuel?
that's one point, and you mentioned partnership, and I completely agree. But for me, it's working on both ways. So you can have discussion with some RMC, you can have difficult discussion with other RMC where you don't feel a partner. But if you don't feel a partner, you manage a business, you take your own decision. You know what is your long-term plan. And then you need to adapt that strategy as well for your line of business. You know that the moving is changing. As you say, you're making money on the move. But the answer as well is to the diversification, to be able to be less dependent of one activity from the other. And the other RMC will see you less than just one-stop shop. They will see different services. So you will add value to their eyes. So they're part of the ecosystem. We need to deal with that. It's part of the game. You just need to choose the right fit for you. So I'm not putting opposition on everything because you can match with someone you cannot. It's business as usual, huh? Yeah? Be my guest.
Steve has a question, and Steve is also passionate about this item, I believe, but I'm not sure it's related.
No, my question is about data, and I wonder if we have. We're talking about value and improving the value of what we do, and I just wonder what role you think data will have in the future on this. If we can get better data on the value and the effects of what we do to present to our customers, do you think that is likely to have an effect on changing this relationship? Or do you think that it wouldn't and they would just simply revert to looking at the bottom line anyway? And if we think that it was of value, how do we get that data?
I'll jump in on that one, just because I want to also circle around and tie it into your answer as well. I mean, the corporate clients, they want to make data-driven decisions, right? That's what they're claiming. So they are going to want more data. And to circle back around, why do we need auditors? Is in the RMC model, they have a fiduciary responsibility to make sure that all the invoices they're processing are correct. They decided that moving is too complicated. Their accounting departments can't do it, and hence we have auditors. And unfortunately, I have to point out that while I was in that position and working with the auditors, it was many times, and many as in more than 5, that we would find false documents and cheating, unfortunately. And it might be your downstream supplier or someone, so there still are tricks happening out there, and they have a fiduciary responsibility. But also back to the data, these companies, and I was looking if Obed was in here just in case I was going to get in trouble. Okay, so Parsifal, I'm telling you, no. I mean, one of the services they're providing is they're collecting data. And what's important is, how does the client know they're paying the right price? And you've all had them come back and say, oh, this is not a competitive price. That's because they're looking at the benchmark across the board and trying to see, are you within the range to make sure it's a fair price? And I bring this up because that's part of the reason why they exist, but also because it could be part of our solution. Because the problem we have is, it's always the lowest price, but we always know the lowest price, you can't really do the right service. So somehow there needs to be an industry benchmarking, which would be great. I don't know if it could ever happen. And then people can see, this is the benchmark for a move in those ranges that you should fall in. And then client no longer is looking for last, they're just looking for, are you within the right benchmark?
But that's about pricing. I think what he refers to as well, data, and to what you said, the fiduciary responsibility of an RMC to make sure that the figures are right. So the auditors have the task to check that, and I accept that, that's fine. But they use these parameters to turn the dial a little bit every now and then. Hang on, we're going to use this to get the pricing down. I've just named the number of items per...
I'm not going to comment on whether the auditors are good or not.
Of course not. But
I can tell you why they exist.
I think this is where Mario refers to, that it's not just checking that what you invoice is correct, but then changing the parameters at a certain time to put pressure on the supply chain. Is that not it?
Yes. But isn't it also, I mean, why I would be interested when it comes to the auditors, it's one of the things that I have not understood in this business yet. Why are they even there? I relate to what you say, there could be cheating somewhere, but what's the business model for them? I would be really interested to know. How do they get paid? Because I think we all know that what gets sort of encouraged gets done. So if you get paid by delaying...
No, they're just paid by
I don't know. Okay. But sort of look at for what, and then on the data side, what data are we talking about, Steve? Because I think we could collect data that push ourselves and pressure ourselves, or we can be looking at the data, because we could also collect a lot of data on what are the most attractive relocation package for the HR departments. We know that. At least the ones of us that are doing both DSP and relocation and, moving and immigration, we know that, and we could share. That's very important data for an HR department. You cannot imagine how... Yeah.
I'm talking about that kind of thing. I'm talking about the data that reinforces the value of
exactly.
what we do. I'm not talking about pricing. Forget about money.
I know. So that's what I wanted to say. That
justify the value of what we do, and the more data we can get to demonstrate that, surely it will have an effect, or maybe it won't. That's the question.
And I think that is, as a newcomer into the business, and many of you probably share this, is when I look at what we do and what my staff are doing, I get so impressed. I could sort of almost tear up sometimes because my team does not understand the value they give. In other businesses, that whole chain would be divided in different services that would be paid and serviced, sold differently, but we just, and then these people feel that they are not good enough because maybe they lack a university degree, but probably are one of the most experienced, valuable people I've seen.
Yeah, but moving is not science, I'm afraid. And you're right in data. And I think in Dubai, this is quite a number of years ago, we kind of studied that, and we were trying to find out how many pounds an item on an inventory list would weigh. And we use a model that's about 50 years old there, and it's being challenged by the auditors because we have nothing to support this scientifically. And moving is not that easy. It's not like a fixed box, always same size, same weight. It's very difficult, and therefore it's difficult to get that kind of data. Andrew, you had a question. It will be one of the last ones, I think, right?
Jesse, you just answered what I was going to say. Is it time for the panel to reduce the supply chain, amount of supply chain between the RMC and the mover, as Mario says? And is it time we stop seeing moving as a widget, bringing it down to a per £100 per... I think we could do so much more to reduce this gap. And it really goes to what Mario was talking about. Reduce the steps, because there is too many steps in the middle, and stop thinking as moving as a widget. A house is different. We know that somebody lives on the ground floor, somebody lives on the 10th floor, somebody lives 30 meters carry, somebody doesn't. It's not a widget. it's a service that we're providing.
And I just want to jump in because on that is part of what we need to do is stop talking about moving as transportation.
Yeah.
It's not, we're not shipping people, we're not a shipper, we're a service company.
Correct.
So revalue ourselves a little bit as well. There's a question over there in the back. Mark?
Yes, Mark Miss, Switzerland. I recall when I first came to the business in the early 90s that in my company at that time, the RMCs were coming, and the huge question was, are we going to work with the RMCs? Are we going to do it? I remember traveling around the States, meeting other partners, and coming back and having to report to my CEO, like, you know, what did they say? Are they going to work with Ascendant at the time? It was called PHH, etc. And it was a huge, huge debate. And eventually, one by one, those who said they were not going to do it, they succumbed. And unfortunately, I think we were just not advanced enough and ready for it. I think now, with this fantastic organization that we're attending this week, we have actually a tool to do it. And the tool is not just ourselves, it's actually something like, you know, the FIDI Association. We need to use that, we need to use it as our lobby, because that makes it independently audited and viable and real. And this is the tool we should use, whether you're a small company like I am, or even the biggest company in the group. But this is a really important tool. We missed the boat, but we can get back on it if we choose to, because we now have the tools for it. And in that case, you know, actually technology helped us in this case, because if we had continued on the way we were in the 90s, we would have no tools to be advanced, but we can now. And I think we just need to accept that. And the one thing, of course, which changed our game is compliance. You know, my partner is on the corporate side of this business, and, you know, moving for her is so, although it's an important part of the process for the transferee, it is not a big part of the process for the mobility team that she runs, because they have got so many other pressures in compliance, you know, even to the point where housing has to be safe housing, security. There's so many other things. And while we are a major part of the transferee's life, we're actually not a major part of the mobility team's day-to-day. I think that's something we just have to accept.
Thank you, Mark. And on that note, I think we have to come to a close. Just a final question for all of you. What would be your advice for the average mover, DSP, in our audience? Average one. Not the big one, not the smallest one, average one. What would they have to do in the coming years?
Yeah, well, I think Nikki touched on it, is if you're a smaller, mid-size, now that economy is uncertain and our volumes, we don't know when they're happening anymore, it's hard to plan, you got to diversify your products. You have to have other means to keep yourself going when it's dry out there. And then I'll reiterate what I said at the beginning, is you got to choose your battles. Who's your target client? It doesn't have to be an RMC. And there's a lot of smaller companies still in your own markets. I know some are destination markets, a lot difficult, but maybe that's diversifying to a domestic business. So yeah, diversify and choose your battles well. You don't have to try to do everything.
Did he steal your thunder, Nikki, the diversification, or no?
No, absolutely not. I would say you need to understand the pain points of your customer and adapt your business model to meet them. And you know, we were talking about data, and there's data in the moving industry, and the data that we can provide in, you know, relocation and the cost of it and whatever. But actually, the biggest pain point for a lot of our corporate clients has got nothing to do with the move. It's all about the sustainability agenda and the compliance agenda. And, you know, one of the things that we actually can do, you know, I don't know if I get lots of brownie points for saying this, Jesse, but, you know, the carbon calculator, you know, for all those little moving companies out there this week who are wondering why FIDI's done this carbon calculator, it's because your customer needs data around sustainability, because it's a much bigger agenda for them in their corporation. And using those tools that are available by FIDI to do that kind of thing allows you to provide that data to them, and you're ticking a box and meeting that pain point. So don't just think about, you know, the information you can give your corporates that's relative to the move. what's the big agenda in their business, and what can you do to help them solve that agenda, and that will help you sustain a relationship.
You did score a brownie point, very well.
To back up on the data, we need to use it as a sales tools to show the value that we bring to the client. So in a couple of meetings that I do, you can talk, you can spend time to discuss about what we have done the last 5 years. In 2 slides with a couple of data, you show them how many people you move, the saving that they do using you, the efficiency, the time around, the KPI and everything like that. Also, on the other side, you need to use the data at your advantage. You need to understand the trend that's coming. You need to anticipate the future. So you're ready to go to the next chapter with that client, and maybe to understand that there will be a switch of services and need to adapt those services. So it's come to diversification, using managing your sweet spot, but don't be afraid to go over your sweet spot, but this is more an ambition point of view. You need to put a bit of ambition on top of that, but I like using the data because as an advantage for my client, but as well for an advantage inside my company to give them to understand. What I saw sometimes is the lack of knowledge of our client. We know everything about us when we pitch. We know everything about what we do. We don't understand the client's need. The data help you to understand the trend and what's coming so you can serve your client differently.
Thank you. Final takeaway from you, Annika?
No, but I think I would sort of like to quote the guy from yesterday morning. I think maybe it's time to change the rules of the game. And this, I think we all know, I mean, in preparing for this, I think this is a super complex discussion we're having. And then that requires a complex resolution as well. So I agree actually with you. I think this is time, if we want to change the rules of this game, it is nothing that we can do independently, whether we're small or mid-sized or even large. So I would really encourage us all to sort of, how do we actually change the rules of the game so that it becomes sustainable? And I think FIDI is an excellent solution. So it's back to you, Jesse. Sorry for having us here. But
another brownie point.
But really, I mean, somewhere in my notes here, I wrote about the auditors, by the way, that could they be EY? Could they be FIDI? Why are we allowing the auditors? We need them, yes. But why are we not steering the auditors? Could we have a FIDI? Yeah. So back to you. Change the rules of the game, please, Jess.
Thank you. It's a little task, I'm getting that. No rebuttal, I'm afraid, because we have to stop. Thank you for being. I want to thank Derek, Annika, Samuel, and Nikki for being on the panel, and thank you all for being here. Thanks so much.